do. So the conclave starts with people back and forth. Who was going to be elected? It was pretty clear nobody was going to be elected who was absolutely opposed to the suppression. There simply were enough votes to block that. Remember, you had to have 2/3. Nobody was going to be elected that was absolutely favorable to the suppression, and nobody was going to be elected who was absolutely opposed. So that left a group of cardinals in between for a variety of reasons. And back and forth, the ones on either side went trying to broker possible solutions. There is one story which is almost worth the suppression. It is so naughty, if you remember it. Cardinal, let's see what time it is. Cardinal Bernice, who was the state cardinal from France, very much wanted to become, after the conclave, the ambassador of France to the Holy See. He was under orders from the King of France to procure, if at all possible, the election of someone favorable to suppressing the society. Now, no cardinal could say or would say, if you elect me, I will suppress the society. No cardinal could say that, and no cardinal could promise that from the other side. Why? Because Julius II, one of the greatest nepotists and one of the great popes in the history of the church, bribed his way to the papacy, bribed his way to it. As soon as he became pope, published an apostolic constitution that declared any election of a pope which was done simoniacally, that is the crime or the sin of simony. I promise something, a spiritual favor, in return for a temporal good. In other words, I'll do this for you if you'll pay me or so. That would absolutely invalidate any papal election. And the last thing these countries wanted was an invalid pope. They wanted a true and real and honest, honestly elected pope who really was elected, because they had to have that kind of a pope if he was going to suppress the society itself. So back and forth they were going. Bernice was pushing at one point with two cardinals named Albani. They came from a very distinguished Italian family. One of their members had already been pope almost 100 years before. One of them was about 80 years old, uncle and nephew. The other one was about 55. Bernice pushed very, very strongly with them at one point, and they pushed back and said, lay off, get off, let us alone. Apparently very strongly, and Bernice said, Your Eminences, please do not take so high a line. After all, we cardinals here, we are all gentlemen. We are all of the same cardinalatial dignity. At that, the elder Bernice, apparently, as the story goes, reached up and took off his biretta, and with a quivering hand and a quavering voice, looked Bernice in the eye and said, "Oh no, Eminenza, we are not all of the same cardinalatial dignity. I did not get this red biretta by being the houseboy for the whore of France." And everybody knew that Bernice, as a matter of fact, had gotten the job of state cardinal from Louis XV at the instance of Louis's mistress, Madame de Pompadour. It was perfectly clear that that's what had happened. I just tell you this story. I don't tell you that I approve of it, but it's an awful good story. In any case, remember, they could not have a simoniacal election at all. Finally, it became clear that several of the cardinals, but maybe one of them, who certainly did not promise the suppression of the society. That is perfectly clear. But there are ways in which you can ask. Would you be willing to suppress a religious order if it were necessary for the peace of the church? Well, yes, you could say yes to that. Would you be willing, for example, to do something about a religious order that has had nothing but controversy within it? And yes, do you recognize, of course, don't you, that other popes have suppressed various religious orders? Yes, and various of the cardinals would go that far. One of them was finally, it became clear that, as I said, they were not going to be able to choose somebody absolutely opposed to the suppression and one absolutely favorable. So they took a middle post, a man named Lorenzo Ganganelli, who was a conventual Franciscan, a good, decent, rather weak-willed man in the long run, but a good and decent man. And finally, oh, by the way, before we get to this, a conclave, as you know, is supposed to be the people who go into it, the cardinals at the present time, are pledged to absolute confidentiality. And they even now have electronic sweeps by German anti-hackers at the conclave itself. You can't bring in any stuff like that. This conclave leaked like a sieve. People were bribed up to their eyeballs, including some of the cardinals, and including the attendants of the cardinals, because since the cardinals were princes and gentlemen of the church, they could all bring about 5 people into the conclave with them. Their personal attendant, their doctor, their valet, etc. And those were ample opportunities to bribe people. What's going on, what's happening, so on and so on. So finally, Clement XIV was elected Pope. The conclave began about the middle of February, and it lasted 2 months until May 19, 1769. It's on your sheet there, 1769. Once elected, the badgering began. You know, there were the wolves pursuing the Pope across the tundra, and he'd throw various morsels to them to keep them away for a while. The representatives, the ministers, the ambassadors of the various powers, France, especially France and Spain, Portugal too, coordinated their efforts to get Clement to suppress the society. He would, give me time, I've got to have time. You don't understand, I've got to think of, you remember so many popes had praised the society. His immediate predecessor had written encyclicals about how great the society was, etc., etc. I've got to deal with my conscience, I've got to deal with other people, etc. Well, he took away from the society the running of the Roman seminary, stopped them from doing certain preaching of jubilees in Rome. See, I'm on the way, I'm on the way. And they kept pressing and pressing. But if you look at, he was elected in 1769, and it's only in 1773 that the society is suppressed. That's 4 years in which the pressure increased until finally Charles III sent one particular ambassador with one job: get it done, no matter what. And he threatened to do all kinds of things, to confiscate church property in Spain, the Spanish government would suppress other religious orders if the Society of Jesus would not be suppressed. And finally, the trump card, this happens or the church might go into schism in Spain. That's the last thing that the Holy See wanted, because it had memories of England at the time of Henry VIII, which had never come back to Roman Catholicism at all. And the last thing they wanted was for a place like Spain or Portugal or France to go into schism. Whether they would or not, it was still a big, big threat. So, meanwhile, totally unconnected with this, in 1772, if you follow the timeline, Poland was partitioned for the first time by Russia, Prussia, and Austria. They each got pieces of Poland. Eventually, there were 3 partitions, and Poland was wiped off the map, really, until after the end of the First World War. But they each got a section of Poland. Just keep that in the back of your mind. Nobody had any idea, and nobody did. There was no connection with the suppression of the society at all. If you had looked up a little earlier, you'd see in 1762, 10 years before, Catherine had become Empress of Russia, crowned in Moscow. That had no relation to deal up to this point either. So, from what I've said so far, who was left out of the interplay of countries here as far as the suppression goes? Our lands. The old, what we call the Holy Roman Empire. I haven't mentioned that at all. And the Holy Roman Empire extended from Hungary through Austria, through the various principalities in Germany, all up into the Austrian Netherlands. It was a huge swath of territory, ruled basically by Joseph II, Emperor, and his mother Maria Theresa, really a Queen of Hungary, and really effectively running the country for a while. She was not at all opposed to the society. She was not going to fight terribly for it, though. But the Pope had a trump card there. I can't suppress the society if maybe a half of Roman Catholicism in Europe, and of course they were Eurocentric, that's all that counted. If half of them yet the rulers didn't want to get in on this. Just at this point, though, Kaunitz, the papal, or rather the great Austrian diplomat, undertook what the historians call the diplomatic revolution. It allied France and Austria, or the empire, which had been opposed to each other for 200 years. It allied the two of them against a rising Prussia and England. How do you seal, how do you confirm an alliance? Nobody today would think that if we signed an alliance with Great Britain, let's say, that Chelsea Clinton would have been married off to one of the British royal family. But at the time, an alliance was sealed by marriage between the two royal houses. Maria Theresa had 17 children, I think, in all. I believe 5 of them had died, but 11 or 12 were still alive. A large number of them daughters, a large number of them already married off. The youngest of them, eminently nubile, eminently marriageable, Maria Antonia. To seal the diplomatic revolution, she was to be married to the Dauphin, the heir to the throne of France. She was. Who did they turn out to be? Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. Sadly so. The poor woman, she was really put upon in every way. But now, at this point, Maria Theresa said, I won't oppose the society's suppression. I won't make waves. At that point, Clement XIV finally succumbed to the threats of the powers and decided to suppress the society in 1773. Before he did, if you look at 1773 on that timeline, Rome, the Vatican, had appointed a man named Sestranchevich, Siestrencewicz. I always write it out for people. He had auxiliary bishop of Vilna. Vilna, which is now, of course, the capital of Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania, was part of Poland at the time that had been taken over by Russia earlier. But in any case, he's a legitimately appointed Roman Catholic bishop up there. Just put that off to the side. Finally, in July 1773, on July 21st, Clement signed the document, Dominus ac Redemptor, our Lord and Redeemer, which suppressed the society. It's a very long document. It goes on page after page after page. I thought of bringing it with me, but I didn't want to bring it from the house. I've got a first edition of the Spanish and Latin first printing of the copy of the letter of suppression. It's Latin on one page, Spanish on the other. But I've been trying to get a copy of the first edition that was published in Rome. That first edition in Rome is important for a reason I'll tell you about in a moment. This all gets complicated. brief of suppression, despite its length,